Welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why and how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for lending me your ears. And if you're watching this on video, thank you for lending me those eyeballs. Today, my man, Jeff Bajorek, Mr. The Why and the Buy, a compatriot in the world of sales and influence, is joining me today on the Sales Influence Podcast. Welcome, Jeff. How you doing?
Oh, great to be here. Great to be here. Fired up to be talking with you again. We spoke offline, not recorded, just a couple of weeks ago, and you gave me the kick in the pants that I needed to get started on some things, and the momentum is building. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Oh man, we're going to get into that just a little bit. Hey Jeff, let the folks at Sales Influence know, how did you get into sales? And then let's talk about the why and the buy. But first of all, let's talk about how did you get into sales?
Oh, reluctantly.
That's most of us.
Yeah, and it's funny. No one, very few, if anybody, grows up and says, you know what, I want to be in sales when I grow up. And it's really interesting. Now, almost 17 years later, I'm thinking, well, I can't imagine not selling anything. I can't imagine not selling something. And I think selling, as I've learned, is really just how you relate to people on a day-to-day basis. If you treated everybody like your best customer, one, we'd probably all get along a lot better, but we'd learn a lot about each other. We would challenge each other to be better. We would solve a lot more problems for people. There'd be better, more interconnected relationships. But I got into selling because I gave 3.5 months notice at my first professional job. So my degree is actually,
what was your background?
My degree is in athletic medicine. So I was working as a certified athletic trainer in a hospital, for a hospital, and I was contracted to a high school to take care of their student athletes. And what I knew was that I wasn't going back for another school year. But I had obligations actually with the boys hockey team that summer to do some off ice conditioning and training programs that I had written. And I said, well, I can't leave these boys hanging. Right. I've been with them for a couple of years. They're counting on me. We've got this program built, and I liked my job. I just didn't want to go back and start another school year. So I told them in May I wasn't coming back in August. And so I had 3.5 months. What do you do? I give 2 weeks notice, but I can't go find another job, right? You can't go hire with another hospital or, something like that and just say, yeah, I'll join you in a few months. So I kind of had some time, and the hospital I was with was happy to keep me. I was good at what I did. I just, didn't want to start the cycle again. So a woman sat next to me. She said, I think you should get into sales. And I said, come on. No, that's not me. I'm not that kind of guy.
At that time, what was your first impression of salespeople when they told you, hey, you should get into sales?
Just pushy, self-interested, trying to talk you into things, trying to talk you into doing things that you didn't want to do, trying to convince you to do things. Convince is a word I've tried very hard to eliminate from my vocabulary. But I didn't think that was who I was. I'm not an extrovert. I'm not someone who likes to go out and be the center of attention and be slapping backs and shaking hands and doing all that stuff. So I had this preconceived notion of what selling was, and I didn't think that I fit. And Rose looked at me. She said, I think you'd be really good at this. I know someone. You're a good fit. I got you an interview. Just dust off your resume. What are you going to do? Will you just take the call? Right?
By the way, it's a great question. What are you going to do?
Right.
What are you going to
do? What do you have to lose? And I said, no, thank you. Let me honor that. I'll take the conversation. One conversation led to 2 or 3 more. And I started on the day that football camp would have started again in the fall here in Michigan. And when I got the offer, this was the first big thing that changed my perception. When I got the offer, the guy who hired me was named Ken. And I said, Ken, I appreciate this. And for some reason, you think I can do this. And through the interview process, I think I agree with you somewhat, but I'm still concerned. I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about the sales cycle. I don't know anything about all this stuff that I'm supposed to know in order to be successful. And he said, here's the thing. I can teach you that stuff. But what I know is that you're a good person. You're a hard worker. You speak the language. And you're teachable. And you've been working with some orthopedic surgeons for the last 3.5 years of your career that are going to be your customers now. And they all told me to hire you. Like, we'll figure the rest out, Jeff. I said, okay.
Wow.
And that was August
I
12th,
like that guy.
2004.
I like that guy already, man. I think that's really interesting, right? You speak the language, which you had the background, and
Hmm.
also the teachable part, which I think is big today when we talk about coachability.
Mm-hmm.
So before you go any further, so like, you were into sports apparently, when you were younger. So you're not totally an introvert, right? You're kind of an introvert, but or were you kind of an athletic introvert? Maybe we can come up with a new phrase here.
Well, I was always a leader. I mean, I was the captain on my teams. I was, I did those things. So I was willing to speak up when it was necessary. I led a lot by example. And I mean, I worked my tail off to be really good, and I worked my tail off to be the best athlete, the best player that I could be, right? But so much of my energy in terms of development and everything was on myself. But in terms of being really loud, being the first one to go over and introduce myself, or, things like that. Like I can turn the extroversion part on, right? Like when we talk a lot about, giving some of these presentations, these keynotes, these just even these meetings virtually, right? The camera gives you no energy back, right? You've got to give it all to the camera, and then all those, nameless, faceless avatars that are out there, right? Because sometimes you don't get all even the people looking back to you. That's work for me. I got to give it. I'm capable of doing it, but it's not my natural inclination. So, always been a leader, but, I'm still more of an introvert, much more of an introvert than an extrovert.
Yeah, I think that's a very fascinating perspective. Do you know what I mean? You come from the sports side, and there is that leadership aspect, which is interesting. We'll get into it further before we dive into that, because I want to know how you tied leadership into selling today. And so you got your first job, but you had not sold before you got this first gig in 2014. You had not sold anything.
Right.
So walk me through the process. Okay, you had the pep talk. You're teachable, you're coachable, you know the language. Everybody recommended you. You're an awesome dude. But at the end of the day, you still got to either pick up the phone and get in that car. Walk me through that process. And the reason I'm asking, Jeff, is because I know there's people who listen to this podcast who are very much like you. Do you know what I mean? They're not the, hey, what's happening? And let's go talk and be very extrovert. So walk me through some of the, the process that you had to go through, and even some of the difficulties just getting going.
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because I went in my first day and I talked to Ken, and I said, all right, I'm ready to get going. And he said, all right, here's the thing. I'm not the guy to teach you. My partner's the guy that's going to coach you. He's going to spend a ton of time with you. I run the business. He runs the people part of the business. I started on a Monday. On Tuesday, that partnership separated. So now not only was the guy who admittedly said, look, I have to run the business. I'm not the right guy to do this for you. My partner is, the partner left. So this guy had to run the business now by himself, handle a separation in his, like it was, I don't blame Kenny for this. And I still see him from time to time. But I was like, oh man, I didn't get what I thought I needed, and I didn't get what I was told I would get. So that was huge difficulty number one. And he did the best that he could. He said, look, I'm going to ride with you. I'm going to show you some of the things that you need to do. Just come on in. This is how you do it. But I understood what was going on. And I think this is valuable too. He showed me how he did it. And I would go on calls with him, and I would see him do these magical things, like just turn this seemingly random conversation into a very persuasive sales call. And I'd look at him and I say, how did you do that? He's like, oh, I've been doing it 20 years. It's something that kind of comes to you. Just keep working, keep trying. But I didn't quite have the guide that I thought I needed. And several months later, we had someone join. He brought on another partner. And that partner had a ton of sales experience, but was new to the area. So he knew how to sell, but didn't have access to anybody. I had access to a ton of people because I took over a book of business. It was in field orthopedic sales. I had a great reputation, represented great companies. He's like, Jeff, here's the deal. You have access to people, but you don't know what you're doing. It's like, I don't have access to people, but I know what I'm doing. So you get me in front of people, I'll be there. And so that over the next couple of years, I mean, we were, not inseparable, but we spent a lot of time together. And so I'd get that access and I'd be on all those sales calls, and there'd be days.
What was this guy's name?
Well, I'm not allowed to tell you, Victor. This is funny.
Okay, give me. I'll call him Bob.
Okay, we'll call him
cool.
Bob. I refer to him as he who shall not be named until he agrees to come on the Why and the Buy podcast. And because he refuses, and I give him hell every single time. So we'll call him Bob.
This is my message to Bob. Bob, stop being a wimp. Come on, you can get in front of people. You can get in front of microphones. Stop being a chump. So get on his podcast, and then definitely I'll watch on my podcast. That's two you got booked already. Stop being a punk. Come on, get on the call. Anyway, I wanted to ask you real quick. I think there's several things you mentioned in that story before we get into Bob's story and how that impacted you. But I think the Kenny thing is interesting because a lot of people find themselves with a poor onboarding process. In your case, it was pretty much non-existent. So talk about now fast forward to the future here where we're at right now, to the present rather, and talk about onboarding and what you would have done if you had to go back in time and do it. How would you have done that to help the salesperson along from an onboarding perspective?
I think there's a lot to be said about co-traveling, making co-calls together, right? Like just having someone over your shoulder to be able to critique you. I think it was very important that a lot of managers aren't allowing, well, some of them aren't allowed to do, some of them don't allow themselves to do, is really make sure that they spend those one-on-one meetings on a regular basis to coach, to mentor, to check in. And it's very, very difficult in the small, medium-sized business category because so many leaders are trying to do so many things, but that you have to be able to invest in and develop your people. Now, here's another barrier that I don't think a lot of people talk a whole lot about is that there are sales reps out there who do really, really well, and they grow into natural ownership or leadership positions. They're really, really good at what they do, but they can't tell you why. They don't know what it is. They can't codify what makes them so great. And I don't think that's a flaw. I just think it's something that is not recognized. Look, you know this, Victor, if you tell someone how to do it exactly the way you do it, very few people will succeed because Victor Antonio is the Victor Antonio. You have honed your craft and developed your own style over the last several years, and you can get away with things that I can't get away with. I can't sell like you. Well, you know what? You can't sell like me either, right? So there's this thing that, I think the best leaders, at least in this arena, the ones who can develop their people, they provide the understanding of why things work, right? Which is one of the things that I recognize. It's like, okay, Victor, you said that thing. Why did that work? Why did that work? And not get you slapped across the face. I can't believe what you said. I cringed just seeing you say it, but you made that person laugh instead of get angry. That's interesting. Okay. What were the fundamentals that worked there? What were the principles that worked there? A lot of people just, they don't think that way, right? They just, I want to, go ahead.
No, I want to pause you because you're saying so many good things, but I just feel like, whoa, because I think what you're saying so many good things because I think, the onboarding thing is interesting. And you're right. I think ride-alongs, if we can call them ride-alongs, is actually traveling. That's how I learned. That's a great point also. And I think what you said, and I use that Bruce Lee phrase when it talks about, when it comes to learning, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and then add what is uniquely yours, right? Which makes you a salesperson. And so I wanted to highlight those because you're absolutely right on that. But I wanted to ask you a question because this is a tough question. I don't know if you have an answer for this. I don't, by the way. So I just want your perspective. And that is when you look at, again, we're talking about onboarding and coaching. You mentioned today, a lot of these managers don't have time. They simply don't. And so let's acknowledge that. One is, it's a two-part question. What, if you don't have the time, what should you do? But maybe a more important question, and this is where the guessing, finger to the wind comes in. What do you think the manager to salesperson ratio should be? I've never asked that question. You just prompted me to ask that question because I was like, I wonder what the sales ratio would be. I mean, I would guess, I'm thinking 1 to 10, maybe, if you really wanted to coach. I don't know. I was wondering off the top of your head what number comes to mind.
It's less than 1 to 10. And actually, I remember hearing this. I listened to a lot of audiobooks, but Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink's and Leif Babin's book, he talks about that. He said, you get more than, it's been a couple of years. I want to say it was 8 to 10. And I think 10 is not a given, right? You got to be pretty special if you're 10, but you can only have so many direct reports. And I think, if you look at the military, right, they've been doing this a long time. They're organized in such a way that the command is spread. And then once that, and this is very important when you have multiple levels of leadership, let's just say there's frontline rep, then there's manager, then there's, let's just say director. The director shouldn't have a whole lot of interface with the frontline reps, because the director should have interface with the managers. And it's really, there's only so many ways you can split your attention, and there are only so many things you can focus on. What's most important? And if you have 15 direct reports, you have no direct reports, right? like Jim Collins says,
it's too many.
Yeah, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have no priorities. If you have more than 8 to 10 direct reports, you're going to struggle to do everything that's necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think managers are overwhelmed, and rightly so. When you go back to like Kenny's story, you came on board, his partner left, now it's back to 0. We look at onboarding. What could have Kenny done? By the way, first of all, what do you think Kenny's magic was? You said he had this magic, he turned people. What do you think it was that he had?
Wow, you're stumping me here. He had a magic about it. Has a magic about. He's very intelligent, very personable, and had just been in the trenches and worked with people for so long, and people loved him. He's such a likable, charming, charismatic kind of guy, and made good things happen, right? Always delivered great results for people. And he always looked for ways to deepen the relationships, his best relationships as well. So just, very intelligent, very clever, very, he always looked to deliver. He's earned his reputation.
I like what you said.
For sure.
I like what you said, because I think that, and you said the word, and I was thinking it, is that there's a certain thing, that charisma.
Yeah.
Right? There's curiosity and charisma. So curiosity we know, but the charisma is a hard thing to define, right? You know it when you see it. It's like art. You know it when you see it, but you don't know why. And you go, but there's no formula for that. And I think that just takes, like time to kind of learn that stuff. And so now fast forward to Bob.
Yes.
So now you're working with Bob. And so now you have the connects, you're prospecting, he has the know-how. How did that relationship work out?
People ask me how I learned to sell, and I say drinking beer. And like, wait, what do you, I'm like, okay, so a couple days a week. I
actually understand that.
Yeah.
I actually understand that.
A couple days a week we'd go, and Bob lived about an hour away. So he'd come, he'd ride with me in my territory. I'd schedule these calls, ahead of time. Yeah. And we'd have a couple meetings, and then we'd go sit down. We'd find a place to grab a bite to eat and a drink. And we'd talk. All right, let's start at the top. How'd it go today? Right? He was there the whole time. So, okay, let's unpack that first meeting. What happened here? What do we need to do next? Did you see what happened? Did you see when he said, or no, did you see when you said, did you see his reaction? Did you read that? What do you think he's thinking at that point? Right. And then what are you going to do next? What do we need to do after that? What does the plan look like? Okay. That's call number 1, call number 2. And sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 beers, and we would break everything down. And I think I was thinking about it before we came on this morning. I think there are 3 questions every rep should ask themselves and be able to answer before any phone call or any sales call, meeting, email, whatever. What am I trying to accomplish here? What do I want to ask for? How am I going to ask? If you can answer those 3 questions, you're going to move a lot of sales processes forward. Most people, I'm not even going to give you a percentage, Victor, this. Most people can't answer those 3 questions, but they're making calls anyway. I was taught.
Most people don't know how to ask. Most people don't know how to ask. I think it was a study by either Forrester or Gartner. It said 76% of salespeople don't ask. By the order they meant also the commitment to the next level. So you look at 76%. That's a lot. And so, and by the way, I want to emphasize that it doesn't have to be over a beer, obviously,
right?
But I think that those ride-alongs tied with the, as you phrase it, the unpacking of what went on, and then it's those subtleties that Bob, the chump who won't come on the podcast, said that was very insightful, which is like, hey, he's listening to this. I'm sure he is.
Oh, he will. I'll put it in front of him.
He said, hey, by the way, when that person said this, did you see the reaction? And I mean, I've had that question asked by my mentor, who I did the same thing. I rolled with this guy, and he was smooth, and he had this charisma that I just couldn't define. I just knew I had to learn how to do that. But he would do the same thing, which is to break out the actual sale and say, here's how to work. What are some of the biggest, like, as you were going through the process, if you could think back, what were some of the biggest, I didn't see that, I didn't notice I was doing that? What are some of the things that you kind of said, ooh, that hurts?
So I have a background in athletic medicine, got into orthopedic sales. And when Bob came on board, I started selling total knee and total hip implants. And I learned to be very selective about the words I used and when I used them. And because when you're, particularly in the United States, this is not the same outside of the US, but in the United States, my job as the representative for the company was to make sure that the operating room staff had what they needed before the doctor asked for what he or she needed. And I had to anticipate what doctor needed so I could get everybody ready, right? So we're kind of orchestrating some of the workflow. There's a lot of instrumentation and specialty stuff. And so there's a time to be funny and there's a time to stay quiet. There's a time to be charismatic and engaging, and there's a time to shut your mouth because there is a very complicated procedure going on here. And oh, by the way, the most important person in the room is unconscious on that table right now, and never, ever, ever forget that. Like that was important. But I learned things like we never have problems, but we occasionally run into issues, right? We don't use the word liability with a surgeon. We may have some special considerations that we want to keep in mind, right? But like, just words are important. The words you use are very, very powerful and very, very important. And never forget who the most important person in the room is. And that is the end customer, right? Like I had a responsibility in that operating room to make sure that I supported everybody who had direct contact with that VIP. And when everybody, and what that did, everybody in the room knew the most important person was the patient. That means everybody's speaking the same language in this, and on the same playbook. So there was that's subtle, right? The difference between problems and issues. I still very rarely use the word problems. I use issues a lot, right? And it's just semantics sometimes, so when you get into nuance, that's a big deal.
I like when you talk about this, because I truly believe in this. And you just hit just like, oh, now cylinders. And people don't talk about this. It's the selection of words, when to say it, when not to say it. Even the sequence of the words matter. But the whole thing, and this is going to sound trite to those who are listening, but when to shut up, just like literally when to shut up and be comfortable with silence.
Oh, man.
When not, just when to hold back. And I think that's as at least I get older, it's become easier. But I think when I was younger, it was really hard to shut up. And I think I was insecurity. And I felt that I needed to talk. And so one of the things I learned is like, shh, if you say something, just wait for it. It's okay to let the silence sit. And so and it's funny because it's all these little things. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it seems like it's all these little things that begin to add up to a great salesperson called Jeff Bajorek. Safe to say?
There are a lot of little things, definitely. And one of the things I learned early on, talking with another colleague when I was with Bob, drinking a beer, actually. And he said, Jeff, this is something you're going to see. I want you to pay attention to it. It's like, you've only been doing this a year now. He said, but you're going to see that there is a startling amount of mediocrity out there that looks like success. If you can just do the work, if you can stay focused, if you can stay diligent, if you can pay attention to details, if you can, show up, do what you said you were going to do, say what you're going to do and do what you said, you're going to do really, really well. Don't be intimidated by everything out there. Just do what you do.
Dude, wait, I got to pause you. I got to pause you, man. I got to pause you. This line was so beautiful. I had to write it down. I was like, this is a great line. You'd be startled at the amount of mediocrity that looks like success. What did this great Bob mean by that? I kind of know what he meant, but I just want your take on it. What did he mean by that?
Well, I mean, on so many levels, in the years since then, I'm thinking about so many ways. Like there are a lot of people who put up fronts and they dress in really nice clothes and they wear nice watches and they drive nice cars and maybe they don't have a whole lot. Maybe they owe more money than they have, right? At the same time, but they're putting up the look. Other people aren't really good at what they do, but maybe they've got a couple really close relationships, and so they succeed despite themselves. You've seen this, Victor. People will succeed despite their own skill sets or talent sets or whatever. But what I take from that is, and I think selling, particularly enterprise selling, and even when I was doing, door-to-door orthopedic sales, right? That's an enterprise sale. I had multiple decision makers, multiple people involved in processes, multiple sales within each sale to make. Sales is very much a project management issue, right? You got to make sure that you know what needs to be done next. You got to make sure you know when it needs to be done. You need to make sure that it gets done. You've got to manage a lot of things. It's not just a fly by the seat of your pants. Hey, you got a great smile and a good handshake and people just kind of like you. Like, there is a discipline and a process that is at work constantly. And you have to have pretty good organizational skills. But just because someone is up there with a great smile and a shine on their shoes, and they have a reputation for being everywhere all the time, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily really good at what they do. It just means that they've been really good at making it look like they're good at what they do. And
I think it's important what you just said, though. I've never heard anybody articulate it that way, that sales, especially in the B2B arena, right, or the enterprise arena, it really is part project management, more so than ever, I think. And, there's, so when I see some of these quote unquote sales gurus, still, focus on the ABC, I'm like, you're on drugs. It doesn't work that way. I mean, if I could close a deal on one shot, it'd be great. But it doesn't work that way, especially when you got the number of decision makers just increasing. And so I think it was important to say that, because I think people listening, they'll see some of these, the smile and the shoe shine folk, right? And they got their act together, and maybe they do. But I tell you right now that if there's a salesperson out there has beautiful smile with beautiful shoe shine, he's got a team of people behind him supporting him that really make it work for him. And I think it's important to mention that. What was some of your, this is the part I like to get to. I mean, what was like your biggest screw up? Like, you're like, oh man, Victor, let me tell you, give me a war story, man. Give me a war story that even makes your stomach turn right now when you think about it. Do you have one?
Yeah, I remember there was a time when there was a less than optimal outcome in the room.
That's so diplomatically put.
And
people, there was a less than optimal outcome.
And the physician made a mistake. Happens, and he was really upset about it. And I mentioned the word liable, and he's like, and it's just one of those things, and that kind of goes back to the point that I already made. But there are certain words that even said the right way, and I was able to recover, because I do believe, our friend, our mutual friend James Muir likes to say that intent matters more than technique. So I think you can get away with some things if your intentions are good. But yeah, I learned, and there aren't a lot of fireworks involved with this, and but this is the one that pops to my head first and foremost on the spot here is sometimes you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and you can see your customers just, their blood pressure goes up. All of a sudden they're flush and their eyes get big, and it's like, ooh, okay. And I think there's a lot to be said about managing that kind of crisis. I'm trying to think of some times when things didn't go real well. And it's not that they didn't go well. It's not that things don't typically go well. And it's not like I try to eliminate these things from my brain, because every time things don't go well, you got to learn, right? I mean, you've got to take those lessons and you've got to learn. I remember getting slapped on the wrist for maybe doing some things around an operating room, trying to be a little bit more helpful than I should be. Hey, Jeff, don't do that. Don't do that. You can get more trouble than it's worth.
Don't do that. By the way, isn't it interesting that the best bosses I've noticed don't use a lot of words or anger. They just use tone. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, when they're really angry, when they're really angry, there are no words.
Yeah, I've seen. I have one boss like, let's not do that again, Victor. Just walk away. And you're just like, for the reason, didn't yell or anything. He just said, let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Just walked away. I'm like, what the? I felt, it's like, my wife does the same thing. She doesn't have to say much. You know what? Let's not talk about this right now. Walks away and I'm like, oh God. Doghouse, 3 days, penalty box, personal foul, said stupid thing, clipping, into the personal. That's it, into the box. Say, Jeff, tell us about, by the way, first of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that you gave me this cool mug here. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. And so tell us about the book, because you were nice enough. Look, Jeff is such a pro. Jeff sent me a coffee cup with some coffee from Somalia in there, which I thought, Sumatra rather, I thought was great. You sent me a copy of your book. In the book, you also, in there was a really nice handwritten card with your business card. I'm like, this guy is just a pro. Everything was branded. I'm like, this guy puts me to shame when it comes to branding. I'm like, God, he's just he's so much more together than I am. So thank you, first of all, thank you for making me feel insecure. I appreciate that. But tell us about your book, man.
So I've got a couple of little books. You and I've talked about this. I write the kind of books that guys like me like to read. So they're 50 pages or so, and they're very succinct, very to the point, and they even have pictures in them because my graphic designer is tremendous. She does such a great job, and I just love the kind of I love her take on the subject matter of the book. But the first book,
by the way, it's well done. I got a big shout out to her because it's well done and well laid out. And I was like. See, even his book, even his cartoons are better than my cartoons. I got cartoons in one of my books, and it just doesn't look like that. I'm like, mine looks so cheesy compared to yours. Anyway, all right, go ahead. Sorry.
So I wrote a book right at the beginning of the pandemic called Rethink the Way You Sell When It Goes Sideways. I found myself writing. I write on a weekly basis. So I found myself writing a little bit to myself because there's always a little bit of me in my target audience, but also to people who had no idea what to do next, no idea where to turn. And it's like, okay, when it hits the fan, when everything goes sideways, we got to cut everything down. I identify a process that really just kind of came to me called PAIR, pause, assess, reflect, execute. Funny story about how that came to me. I can get in another time. I said, let's identify what's most important. Let's think about what we need to do. Let's focus on what we can do and not on what we can't. And then let's make sure we go to work. And it's really, it was just a book that was designed to remind people that, hey, we still have jobs to do. We still have problems to solve for people. The way we go about making our calls and helping them may change a little bit, but the fact that we still have to help them doesn't, and we still have work to do. Let's go.
How did you apply the PAIR method when the pandemic hit? How did you apply your own formula, PARE? Walk me through it.
Well, when everything is in upheaval around you, and you don't feel like you know which way is up, it's important to give yourself the permission and then force yourself to stop. You have to make the spinning room stop, right? And okay, where are we? We're on firm ground. I'm alive. I'm here. We're concerned about maybe some illness and things like that. How's that going to affect my family? And that's where things can start spinning again. So let's just, hey, right now, right here we are. Step one. Then let's assess the situation. Yeah, go ahead.
Stick to pause for a little bit. Why do you think it's hard for people to hit the pause button?
Oh man, because everything we do is bigger, faster, stronger right now, yesterday. And I think, particularly with the tools that we have and the technology that we have, I ruffled a few feathers when I said earlier, tech doesn't help you sell. It only helps you scale. And you better think about what you're scaling before you do it. And because there are, these platforms that'll help you send massive amounts of people the same email, and it'll make it feel like it's personalized. And I think the technology is really cool, but if you can't sell the one person sitting right in front of you who's leaning in, why are you trying to sell to 1,000 people at the same time who've never heard from you? I feel like the cart is put before the horse quite often. And so we've got this, what have you done for me lately? And why didn't you hit your number yesterday? Kind of attitude. We owe it to ourselves to pause. We owe it to ourselves to recognize where we are right now, think about where we want to go. And I love what you said, by the way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's hard to hit the pause button. I think there's this anxiety,
Yeah.
almost like this neurotic anxiety
Hmm.
but I got to do something. I got to do something, right?
Hmm.
And so I love what you said, by the way, that technology doesn't help you sell. It does help you scale, but it doesn't help you sell. And that's a big shout out for people who think it's the size of their technologies, stack that matters. I don't think so. So I've paused. You paused, and so when the pandemic hit, I imagine you just kind of just like, all right, what's going on, just like everybody else.
Hmm.
And so when you went to the second part of your formula, the assessment phase, what did you start doing there?
Started thinking about the clients that I was working with and started thinking about how I could best help them. Started thinking about what I was going to need to do to try to grow in this pandemic, to offset some of the clients that couldn't do work with me anymore because they were small businesses and relied on people walking into their stores or whatever, and all this uncertainty. And I remember having a couple of deals. One that was just getting started with. They said, Jeff, speaking of pause, we got to pause this, right? And there was another one that was just getting ready to start with. And I said, yeah, we're going to time out. We love you. We're going to work with you. We got to wait till this goes through. And so it was just, for me, it was just trying to make sure I knew what was important and make sure that I didn't get caught up in that anxiety, in that neurotic kind of energy of, well, I got to do something. I have to do. No, you know what? You don't have to do anything right now. You need to take stock. You need to identify what's really important. You need to make sure you're thinking about, again, the things you can do, not the things that you can't. And, what is the opportunity here, really? I mean, because I believe, Churchill gets credited with this, never let a good crisis go to waste. My biggest fear was that I was going to come through this pandemic and not be better for it. That drove me, right? This was an opportunity to learn. This was an opportunity to reflect. This was a real mirror moment for all of us. And what I noticed was that people were really getting caught up in the idea of what they could and couldn't do without thinking about whether or not they should. And I think that's the wrong attitude.
I love what you said. The reminder about, I love that question. What is the opportunity here? Because when the pandemic hit, first there is that pause and just like vertigo, right? Like what's going on? Because nobody knows what's going on. But then you do the assessment. I like what you said. You focused on your existing clients, because I think that was a very smart move, because as you know, it's easier to sell to existing customers than to go try to acquire new ones. So I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think people had different reactions. I always say the fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? People fight, hey, I'm going to figure this out. The fright people are just going to just shoot. The flight people are just going to just get smaller, which is never a strategy. And then there's the freeze people who don't do anything. And so how did you, so you're in the assessment mode, right? And so you've assessed this. Mm-hmm. What's the next step? What's your mindset now? Okay, I see what's going on. Now what do I do?
Well, the next step then is to reflect. Planning is really what that is. It's, what are my options? What is the opportunity? What do we have here? Now, what are my options? What can I do? And what did it mean that I had to do? Okay. If my biggest client were to go away, what would that look like? And then how would I recover? Right. And now let's make sure that they don't go away. But, what is the backup plan? It's just it's all triggered by the pause, right? You got to give yourself the space to think about this stuff. But, reflecting on what your options are, and then choosing the small handful, right? The 2 or 3 really to execute on, which is the last step in the pair process. But I thought, okay, great. Should I build some stuff online? I've got a community online that could definitely lean into a little bit. That's harder to do than most people will tell you. It's definitely harder to do than most people will make it look. But okay, that's an option. All right, I feel better about that. I'm energized by that, right? Like that's the thing. When people don't feel like they have any place to go, they don't feel like there's another option, they don't feel like they have a secondary, tertiary plan to continue to move forward, that's when they panic. And panic is the opposite of pause. I say that in the book. I say you can't panic. That's the wrong P. Hold on, we're getting off on the wrong foot here. So as I reflected on what my options were, I felt better, felt calmer. And I think that's what people will do if they enable themselves or give themselves permission to do that.
Yeah, I think there is solace in the execution. By that I mean is that when you're doing something, it's when that part of your brain, the amygdala, just kind of calms down, right? Because you're doing something. You know, that whole jitteriness at the beginning before the pause, you need to do something. But as you move through your process and you get past reflection, you said, all right, now let's execute something. And then we all know it's an iterative process, right? We're not going to get it the first time. And so I think that stops a lot of people from going. So as you know, what are some of the things you see today in selling? Okay, so now we're kind of a year into this pandemic almost, right?
Yeah.
And so what are you seeing? What are some of the changes? What's coming, man? What do you think is happening?
Ooh, if I could tell you what was coming, you and I would be on a beach somewhere because we'd know.
A private beach,
Yeah.
6 feet of distance, we'd be good.
I think what we're seeing is people are reluctantly and begrudgingly realizing that they still have work to do because we're a year into this pandemic and we're still not out of this pandemic. And I think so many people held on to the idea where it's only going to be a couple months. We'll just put our feet up for a little bit, be kind of a forced vacation. We're going to get through. It's going to be okay. And then everything will get back to normal. No, that's, and quite frankly, you know, we've got vaccines rolling out. This is the biggest logistical project that's ever been seen across the world. And the idea that it's going to go seamlessly and flawlessly is funny to me. So we know the light at the end of the tunnel is there. We just still don't know how far away it is. And we don't know what it's going to look like on the other end. And so I think people are getting back to this idea, well, I guess I still have work to do. All right, I guess I have to do more meetings over Zoom or, you know, Google Hangouts or Meet or whatever. And they're figuring it out. And I think that the people who recognized that earlier are way ahead. And I think right now, if you're listening to this, if you're still on the fence about whether or not you need to figure it out, you will still have an advantage over the hundreds of thousands of people who are still begrudging their situation right now. You know, Victor, I think it's a good thing in most ways, but you know, I never had a base salary. I've never had a base salary in sales. And I think there are reasons to give people that. And so I'm not arguing that, but I think that in kind of my formative years as a seller, it's like, man, if you're not selling something, you're not eating. And I've got a wife and 2 kids who still really like me. And I know that they like it when the heat's on and there's food on the table. Right. So that's on me to figure these things out. And I didn't have the opportunity ever to sit back and say, well, at least my base will cover me this month until I'm looking 2-3 months ahead all the time. And I
that'll keep you going. I mean, that'll keep you going, man. That you know, it's you know, I did a show. I don't know if you know that I did a reality show.
Yeah.
Called Life or Dead, right? Mm-hmm. And so in there, you know, we talked about the number. 75% of American families live in paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in what you're saying as well, because I think a lot of that anxiety comes when you don't have your financial act together. And I think this gets back to what you said earlier about people who look like they have it all together, but when you really kind of scratch the surface, they don't have a lot together. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is another, like, you know, just another reminder in life that says, you know, try to get some financial stability under you, because I think, you know, and by the way, if you're a great salesperson, you can sell, you know, rain, snow, or, you know, shine, doesn't matter, then great. But in this environment, I think it's tough. And I think, but yet some industries are just booming. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know if you've noticed this, that some industries, what have you seen from industries that, you know, are really just cranking out there?
I think they're able to be present enough to recognize the opportunities that they have. Right. I mean, look at Zoom. I mean, we've connected over Zoom a couple of times. Did they know that this was coming? No. Were they ready for it? I don't know that they were ready for it, right? There were some issues along the way, if you follow that company's very public history with this pandemic. But, you know, look, where there's crisis, there's also opportunity. It doesn't mean that opportunity is easier to deal with sometimes, right? So I think that's an interesting kind of way to look at it. Like, no one gets lucky in a situation like this. I mean, some people are more fortunate than others, right? But you still have to take advantage of those opportunities, and you still have to be, you know, I don't think you can plan for things like this as a business. But when you recognize the opportunity in front of you I think you have to be able to think through the opportunity. You have to develop a plan and you have to execute on it. It's a project to manage. It always is.
Yeah. By the way, it's interesting that you said something about luck. I don't believe in luck, but I believe a lot of companies are being lucky, as a consequence of what's going on.
Sure.
I mentioned that the pool industry is just taken off. The pest control industry, anything has to do with residential sales contracts, taken off because people are spending more time at home.
Yep.
Who would have saw that coming? But they were ready. That's the good thing to point out. They were ready when all this hit, not because it was planned. It just happened to be that way, and that's luck. And so, again, you can't plan for it, but when it happens, it's a good thing, man. It's a good thing.
I have over here in my office, I have a water rower, right? Because I stopped going to the gym. We've got a higher risk profile in my house than some other people do. So until people can spend more time outside, right? And we don't have, and I live in Michigan. It's cold today. I tried to bring the gym to my house, and it took me 2 months to order a rower. Like I had to order it and it took them 2 months to be able to build it and send it because the demand was so high. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's like, so there's certainly good fortune to be had. It's certainly not a zero sum game, but I mean, there's good fortune to be had. But we've heard about those times when businesses weren't prepared for it. How many stories have you heard, Victor, of, Oprah deciding that this is one of her favorite things and then orders shoot through the roof and it actually drives a company out of business because they don't have the infrastructure to support it. It's like, oh my gosh, right. There were too many people wanted your stuff. Like so many people wanted your stuff. You had to fold. Like, wait a second. Yeah. But
by the way, that's a whole other conversation. Yes. That's a whole other conversation. So to close this out, Jeff, I mean, when you look at selling today, given the environmental changes that are happening right now, literally environmental changes that are happening now, what are some of the things that people need to start doing to be better at selling, man? Just some of the, the blocking and tackling, if I can use the sports analogy on that one.
Oh, love it. I go back to my 5 forgotten fundamentals of prospecting. Know what you bring to the table. Know who you should be talking to. You have to create tension. You have to demonstrate expertise, and you have to keep your swagger. That's been something that I've been writing about and talking about since I started my business almost 6 years ago. Like, this is hard. There are going to be peaks and valleys. There are going to be ups and downs. But you got to remember that the journey is worth taking, that the difficulty means something, and that every challenge presents an opportunity. And when you can see the little victories, I tell people, and I mentioned this at the end of Sideways. I said, when it feels like when everything's going sideways and it feels like the world's upside down, you just got to find a way to keep moving forward because no step is too small if it's headed in the right direction. So just make sure that you know what you bring to the table, what's unique, how you can help people that in ways no one else can, who's going to resonate with that, and make sure you're always out there in front of people. Make sure you're always out there advancing things. 2 things you can do to sell more: spend more time selling, and make sure you're advancing the sales process every chance you get. You keep doing that, you're going to do well.
Yeah, I like the whole thing about taking small steps. You're moving, you're doing something. I think it's inertia that kills us. Oh. So anyway, Jeff, let these folks know where they can find out more about you, brother.
My website, jeffbajorek.com. Pretty straightforward. That's my home on the internet. I don't know when this is going to run, but like February 18th, it's going to be brand new. So if you hear this before February 18th, go and then go back again after February 18th. But I'm building a community at rethinkthewayyousell.com. And we're having fun there. The community's growing. It's small right now, but it's still growing. And there's a lot of interaction going on there. It's really not just about my content and about sales, but it's about what it's like to be in sales. So we're taking I think it's the community aspect that a place like LinkedIn or Twitter just can't offer anymore because social media is what it is. There's a lot of promotion going on there. I take advantage of it. But in terms of really meeting and interacting with people, that's what I'm building at rethinkthewayyousell.com.
Love it, man. So Rethink the Way You Sell. And Jeff, thank you very much. And that is it for the Sales Influence Podcast. Leave us some feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you find us. Love to hear your feedback, your commentary. So after you go to, what was the title again?
RethinkTheWayYouSell.com.
RethinkTheWayYouSell.com. Go to RethinkTheWayYouSell.com. After that, check out the Sales Velocity Academy. Over 50 courses, 500 videos. If you want to increase your sales velocity, this is Victor Antonio with my man, Jeff Bajorek. Always reminding you, selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care, folks.